what's the page number we have? Because somebody took my book, volume 3. Page number, volume 3. What? 229. Thank you. Yeah. Namo Guru Be Namo Vidaya Namo Dharamaya Namo Sanghaya Namo Guru Be Namo I would like to remind every one of ourselves here to take a moment and cultivate bodhicitta motivation, which is regarded as the highest motivation seeking complete enlightenment for the benefit of all other sentient beings. And with that kind of motivation, we should all participate in this Lamrim discourse on the stages of the path leading to enlightenment by Manjushri Lama Tsongkhapa. To give you the blessing of lineage oral transmission, allow me to read about a couple of pages from the Lamrim Chemo, the great treatise on the stages of the path to enlightenment, volume number 3 in the English translation, page 229.
The summer the two was a me watage, tage, madam, daughter, day, no day, you're a dimmin and dimmy the shiver, she, mena, minjuro, toy. You did them, you know, you about one ever, know, just about your mind, the thing you never, Jim, so until it's just above the uni. Just about be the time the congregation and the congregation, Hono, Duba Shaw, don't do it, the corner of metaphor, so she was joy. You the two times you do any she didn't, she didn't be here over some Jago, and Chava Duba, semi to one of my be, think you, ye, daisy, so soon, Java. Sida mere shewa sida mere shewa tuwa yewa la me yewa tawa shewa la me tabi shewa. Tseme che na rang ju te je rang ju te je wang men zhou je tseme che na ni yu de tan ju ni tan ju ju tuwa de shewa la me yewa me tabi shewa. 中国的前不久，我是计划给什么？计划给什么当普遍定怎么的？这边呢，你早一笔写了，我听到前不我前不开了，我怎么去中国吧？因为现在的呢，出什么前面这边大街，现在我让去当，出什么开了呗？这就是差不多吧，咱们这现在。 天主的对吧？那我是大的，天主的，现在的刚上过不菜的时候的，那刚上的大天主的，让有吃完时候的，的天主的，现在我那时候看这些呢，但是咋样你在这些的，看现在刚下看这些的嘛，就是刚刚被开朗的这东西，你不给项目都觉得，那我你去过你个别参谋成做下些要么的是。 现在看了咱就非得学这些呢，你过的是，他头脑都这些么的。
我是杨就是说了的。
啦。
跟着杨就是说了呢。
对的，他天主都当因为让就是看这些这种的，他这些的可能是呢，你看啥天主了现在你看了咱就你刚下些么的，前面这个管你写要么的是。
可是我说。
哦。 다 처음에 들어가는 거야. 신의 랑이 다래 그랬어. 어 뒤에서 다 뒤에서 거기는 막 어디다 도다 도도부터 당시 거기 거시고 소소배 디인사 세미쇼 하고 뭐 해다 세미쇼 예비 하고 뭐 해다 근데 sonza 이 캐나다인 거고 그랬어. 다 대주와 디인스.
네.
다 랑지는 순 세미쇼 거시고라.
알레노스 알레단데 디로 자 안데 셰드로 와게.
어디
So Geshe read up to page 234, and so just to recapitulate what we talked about a couple of weeks ago, according to Master Jayananda, the distinction he and his followers make between Prasangika Madhyamigans, middle-way philosophers, and Savatrantika Madhyamigans is this. The Savatrantika Madhyamigans accept what is known as autonomous reasoning or Rangyujita. And that's the presumption is that it's based upon valid cognitions. Yeah? He says that Prasangika's position or viewpoint is simply an assertion. It's not based upon valid cognitions. If you base it on Semendruba, valid ascertainment or establishment, then you must accept what is regarded as intrinsic reality or the autonomous reasoning. Yeah, so that's how he makes a distinction between Prasangika Madhyamigans and Savatrantika Madhyamigans, right? Jayananda and his followers, right? So they said that everything we say is based upon valid cognitions because we accept what is called autonomous reasoning. Everything you are saying, Prasangika, it's just a mere assertion, it's just like opinion. It's really not based upon valid cognitions. If it is based upon valid cognition, then that you would have to accept what is called intrinsic reality or the autonomous reasoning.
我的别的地罗马老早的这个我们把新地方给我怎么做呗？让给他们叫我没劲，学生老师说你搁那这不听我嘛这个上去没得多，日本那么结尾，日本人现就知道多怎么行了，这里先别人都没别人一点子，那么他们就的就我没晓得，现在天主可能赢了，这样日本天主呢人一天他都被顺利去跳可能。这样大当七八年开朗吧，他都会到一边，养的被什么一弄，这了等现在看你这不叫你习惯你切就是，这了要就被天主呢，这个他能这样的经常的朋友老早都看着现在我这里是他看见。日本这现在在提的他天主的让你那的，你天主怎么让天主的来呀？你日本偏偏天主的，日本偏偏天主的，让你偏偏是我了，让你偏偏天主是的要嘛来是，让你没偏偏天主怎么的？你给我就能过来嘛就这了，你偏就偏个才没说你最后的需要嘛来是，他第就是都习惯你是个啥的。
但是这样呢，这个天主不路是天主不是的。
啦，天龙桥的，天龙桥完就修的上的，搞下课的现在俺天龙在英国这些的天主这个是吧？他就大桥完就在上面穿的。
大洋大这个。
现在那真的容易这种是吧？
大洋大这。
他感觉他天主路天龙在一趴就搞下去不，上面穿的搞下要么是吧？他感觉到这呢。
And this is where I think last time I confused all of you. I, the translator, not the teacher there. So I have to correct us. Remember, we were trying to differentiate between these two types of syllogistic reasoning. What is called, tenjur yangda, consequential syllogistic reasoning, and da yangda, perfect syllogistic reasoning. And according to Jayananda, so he claims that they use perfect syllogistic reasoning, Dayanda, to prove their point, to refute argumentation, whereas he and his followers claim that Prasangikas are simply using what is called consequential syllogistic reasoning, where you were very helpful. Where, for example, this is my footnote, okay? What is it? Okay, any object we can do is, for example, that's right. Part would have to be impermanent because it's a product. That is a consequential syllogistic reasoning. But if we say part is impermanent because it's product, so that's regarded as a perfect syllogistic reason. That's where I messed up last time, although I tried so hard. But from Jayananda's point of view, that Prasangikas really don't have what is called perfect syllogistic reasoning. If you accept that, then you really have to accept that what is called autonomous reasoning, which they don't. So Prasangikas are simply using consequential syllogistic reasoning, tenjur yangda, just to be able to show the contradictions in some other's position and then refute it. So they don't have what is called perfect syllogistic reasoning. Okay. Although I'm really sick today, my mind is better thinking, I think.
But drip get to the motor tribute to that never shot over. That was never need that. This is what
Yes. So one of the main areas where the debate happens is with regard to what is called self-production or production from self, dakje. Yeah. And those who assert there is such thing as self-production or something produced on its own by itself, so they assert that a cause and its effects simultaneously exist, they coexist. So during the time of a cause, its effect exists in a sort of a dormant form, not in a visible form, dormant form. That's why they said a cause can't bring out its effect. Yeah. Now, to refute that, self-product, that's, if, one would assert that a cause and its effect or result were to exist already at the same time, then, production becomes meaningless. Why need is there to produce the result? Because it's already there. It exists with its cause, right? And so that's one fallacy pointed out. The second fallacy is that still if you assert that it need to be produced, then the production would be endless, right? So something is produced, and that thing has to be reproduced, and that thing has to be reproduced. So where does it all end? So it would become an endless production.
What is it? Do last you have a job, yes. So the you had young job going, not any job to me in Jury. Tonji took G. They were miracles. That Jenna, any young job, Tonji took G, made the thing they were miracles. They do not in a dali job, they were miracles, so he in the Juba. The Parubu, Tedishini, Tuta Dozanji, said Jibujanos. That the 10 years the thing is what that conject. Joa Tonji, Castadal, again, and the Joa Tonji, the Tommy, the Tommy, redo those. Or Tindon, Joa Tonji, the Joa Tonji, Tommy, the Tommy in singing, Sujio, that conject, Tonji, Joa just hire you at that Tom Jagua, Tommy, mother, Tommy, Sigmarva. I said that. Your Jibby, that just that Miruso here, Lane, Giovanna Paru, but he did it. I said, this is the Changio Coronalia, and China Dibutusia, any because you to see and Dibu like I did, young Java Tonji took in said the Giordo Sirva. So Dibutu the Indico, Java told me they would go you Carawa. I think you took the ending, you waiting your race or that.
So this debate is happening between, let's say, school of thought called enumerators or Changjemba in Tibetan. Literature translates enumerators. So enumerators accept that, do not accept endless production or production would be meaningless. They do accept something is produced that is purposeful, meaningful, and there has to be end to that production. But they do assert that a cause and its effect, outcome, exists simultaneously. Okay? And so those two assertions, there is some kind of contradiction, isn't it? If you say that a cause and its effect coexist or simultaneously, but at the same time you said that the production, is still it serves purpose, and there is no end. How should I say? A production has an end, so there is a contradiction. So through the use of consequential syllogistic reasoning, Tenju Yangda, so that contradiction is pointed out. Said, you cannot make that kind of contradictory assertion.
Oh, Dale, Joe Majiti, Majang, She Majang, She Daja, Rangi Dale Joe Mujobe, Tamja Medo, Dale Joe Me Dale Joe Mujobe, Tamja Medo, Dujadan, Sumbani, Parubu Rangu showed the Vishedu, Peda, Conjeva Tamji, Namadan Dova, Yuzin Sumbi Gunyumni. Dikene he using chamber we gone in 고 고뉴바오스 다 디테레가 자야니 데와드 마셰 다 딘데와드 자용사 카데스나 엔다 산제 달바게 텔용레스 다티 달마이 세아디 카리 키시오르스나 엔데 소즈베가 타와포네 엔 다게 켈라니 엔 두제 페메 테유 켈라요 마리스 달 껴메아타 엔 껴와 토메 이비시르스 라우드잖아 다 추조네 엔 달 깨드스 드바 요마라와디 베든다 두제 페메 세유 레우마르와 어디 메라다 엔 땡큐 잠티고레스 어디 바두제 엔 두제 페메 포요 마리스 탐자미에도 다게 전 탐자미에 세야데 데르다 달 껴에 탐자데 미에서 거와 어디지 다 줍자도 송바니 포로보랑 쇼주비체디 빼다 그 건거 탐지 너무저 모저버ጆ스 다 줍자 다시야디 티티미다 다 링데지 세야디 세레 다 초도부터 다 가지 가다게 태교 장과 있는 로도 고저 말이 랑주 다 있는 에네디 랑주 다도 땡그면도스 다 가지 어디서 어디 칠 빼달 거 탐지를 가만 저봐 요 유즈스 부고유네 어디 알레 티지 수로 나와
근데 양쪽으로 이렇게
디디레 가르사 단다 디 태교도 고도선 가리거서 날 저메데 헤메자 현기 다시 고바 좀 인제스 랑기 달리켜 메바 무조베 제와 메바 무조베 탐자 메도스 달리 랑기 달레 제와 메바 무조베 다게 메바데 따양다 된요 말스 탐자 메도 줍자 소문에 포르부랑 쇼드비셰디 빼다 강거가 탐지 가마든 저 뭐저번 joaos 다 종주도 데레스 거다 어디스고다 다 유즈스 본고뉴네 디켈는 다 대기 유즈스 본고뉴세야디 대기 다 졸마 용고 디마 가야 되레샤
다 단다게 thank you 베제 셰디 신기 타기 고야 그리바탄바자마데 소스 로리아 타기 가서 더 매버게 두고요 말스
다 매버 드베 따야 다 대고 말스 자가지
다디 자야 안한데 루그르베게
라
단데 람게 자야 안한데르베
저 아니 다 쯔바디 용어와 다 쯔바디 뭐 용다디 예디 자 아니 다 커르데 말이디 디 쯔바 용다 제르 뭐시 다 세히시고 관계 so in the case of I think this whole debate comes from the Jaya Ananda's the whole assertion about where he and his followers say we accept such thing as autonomous reasoning, and which means that the things we talk about is based upon perfect syllogistic reasoning and a valid cognition based on that. Whereas your position, meaning in this case to the Prasangikas, you are simply using what is called consequential syllogistic reasoning, Tenju Yangda, because you don't have what is called perfect syllogistic reasoning. So when we use the consequential syllogistic reasoning to refute self-production, production from self, where you said, self-production is not feasible because that production would serve no purpose and it would be endless production, you are simply using consequential syllogistic reasoning to show the contradiction there and refute that position. But you have not been able to establish your own viewpoint about self-production because you don't have perfect syllogistic reasoning. See the position? So it's almost like a footnote. You are really good at refuting others, but you really don't have your own position because you don't have a perfect syllogistic reasoning. Yeah. 다 유즈스 보고인세들이 다 유즈스 보고인세들 거기 다 저기 도와 메디 따디에 어디 고유 그래서 켈레는 디켈은 이거 이니피게 페네다 그래서 디켈은 거는 디켈고 페네 시밥 켈레는 메다바 켈레고 세아죠와 어디 유즈스 보고인세들와 고유 뭐 오늘 켈레 바로 켈레 공도 예도 매 얘는 din이 담고 주베랑이 다요 저로 매는 신이 켄 거베 리바지와 메도데 신나 돈을 집에 가서 랑심에 봐. 저메 시비. 줍잔되는 랑지 탐자다 안 되고 그 텔레 민데 비교메도 대바장기 탐자 이 탐자 위에는 탐자 위에는 요 셰셰도서 제가 파이다 그런 조전 저런 애들 현도도 까고 말에 스카르라는 까고 요랬어 나 까다 가래까서 대바장기 셰르보다 세미 전에는 제고 말이지 다디 자아니들 로그디 해당도부터 tindeji resi was
no did I shoot
la
this shooting so I mean I think it's looks sometimes there's redundancy comes up where so Jayananda's position is that you are good in using what is called consequential syllogistic reasoning to be able to refute others' viewpoint, show contradictions there, but you don't have your own position because you don't have what is called perfect syllogistic reasoning, to make that assertion.
this cause then wrong short drove be do me young Shenjo Koa Zamdan, there was a Yajang, Tamja Mebata, Show Mebayan, Tondon the Jeva Gopso, Rashi Mebala Sobe, Tamja Minjobal Shiges, Kelly Khan, Tamji Mevani, Mindebe, Tondambala Jeva Gopso, Rashi Mebe, Dujaki Langne, and Tedon looks, Ted Roluxo, Drovane, Roji Batang. Tetar ke milne par she deba gobatsam shewani thengyuro shiba nangos ta dire ko ma jermusi gobatsam ta daya indi da phug dire gombalana o dire da gaje dujatibe ta ji yu chi ke le da rangji ba che riba
No so
khengan gobatsam gi dujatibe ta da be nam sha me ne ga ke me di thengyuro shi ta theram ke war ti so da tina sho mamudu se chik ta dire do
So, as this came before too, that according to Jaya Ananta's viewpoint, because this all related to the whole debate, there was raised, I think, what is it? Baba Viveka raised objections to the Buddha Palita's work, and then Chandrakirti come on the defense about all of this is tied to that whole complex argumentations later somewhere. So I know you were getting lost because we are losing that big picture. And so what is the distinction between what we call Prasangikas and Savatandika Madhyamikans? So according to Jaya Ananda and his followers, the distinction is simply this, that Savatandika Madhyamikans have what is known as autonomous reasoning, and so they use perfect syllogistic reasoning to establish their position and to refute others' viewpoints. Whereas Prasangikas, because the word has to have tinjur, consequential reasoning there, are simply using what is called consequential syllogistic reasoning, tinjur, to be able to refute others' viewpoint, but they don't have perfect syllogistic reasoning, to establish their own viewpoint. So that's simply the distinction between the two Madhyamikans,
Oh, that teacher, Jerusalem, that Tata Oma Basset, that Pug, the Insarova, Tata Oma Tenju and Devatani, Tondama, Tani, Kanga, Zambi, say, Killing, Tanya, K. Milinde. Kete tidaway tamja yena diduji pe ta jan de go la de tan ranji banjuro ta tangi za ni da jikba de sha rawa ede kele khan yo maris kharis ne kele na dubja ta pe ga kele go ti shi ne ranji bi de do dos she da ta ronu la ene kele pa parable pe lodo go wa ta himu ronu kele da dubja khan ya mes
this is what I
da ronu da de program ta da do se
Alpengame looked Jayananda looked
大的背这个当下开朗起进来，那种有这种的是，就说的这么一下的，你把是要么让路是要么的是，不如干就我的说。
So I think some of the early Tibetan masters, we call Pyongama, their position aligns well with Jayananda's position, where they said that if you accept what is called perfect syllogistic reasoning, such as a pot is impermanent because it is a product, if you accept subject, predicate, and the reasoning perfect, then you necessarily must accept what we call autonomous reasoning. So if you don't, accept that, then what you are using is a consequential syllogistic reasoning simply to refute others' viewpoints, and you yourself don't have what called a positional assertion that is based on valid reasoning. Okay, so the early some Tibetan masters, so their position is in agreement with the Jayananda's position that we witnessed before. Yeah.
我在空中空的这个尊多多多，给的人俺了他们家也，真的俺了讲的也是，俺了他们家没为呢，你看着就俺就没可能赢，给的我从那时候被确认，我是明年的日本多吧，现在呢，现在的没些俺了两个没，接的日本就是把来这7月的一天得到。那么小米这边没可能了呢，说没吧，得了新说看了这的，新加坡的有的没的也没接，这可能说的也没吧，得了有的人不两个节吧也没，先送吧了，说的他就没吧送的些了，但的空中实行的空的些的，但的开始那做到的那个俺他们家没些就是，让新这边他们家没些，让新这边大的别没些个么意思。大他们家看也没得什么嘛，是吧？就可能是他这那吃饭能一些，哦，这是一个开两周的，是吧？这个是他们家大概要嘛的，我的一直的说的。
So those who make that kind of assertion, such as autonomous reasoning, of course, they make reference to statements we find in a work called Refuting Argumentations or Zhendao, Refutation of Arguments, where there are statements like, I don't have my own position, literally translating. Okay? And what it really means is that I don't, assert any intrinsic, positions. But that's the real meaning. But they took it literally as it is. So they say, look at that, And so they said, so in your case, you don't have your own assertion because look at what is stated in that work. But the meaning of that statement, which requires interpretation, is that I don't assert anything that is intrinsic, right? Intrinsic nature.
我这时候呢，他看见的，他底下控制底下个最新浪是开浪吧，因此我那说的他们家看也没事。我的两个就对起，说些可能没学的，天就是完了，东北同等，跑日本找人家，国家呢，那国家的嘛人的，然后他们家没学的是对的，他感觉，台湾的他说跑日本人的，然后他们家没学，这个的时候感觉，台湾的同的大理教的是吧？哦，大理教的长期课上开两个嘛都，因为。我们人来大教，他们家劳动开零嘛是对吧？他可能在大教嘛这些，就当可能被他们家在没直接讲对吧？现在大地的开始，家乡的安的开始，小那些的，安的一路不差那个的做的些，开始我在地开始做的，但是这个经济家的嘛，就是大家个听嘛是吧？我地开始对不对？
I think a lot of these argumentations are related to the use of the terms or expressions in the original Indian text, and where a lot of those requires, interpretations. So when you look at the words, what called literally, you get one sense. But if you interpret make a contextual interpretation, it will have a different meaning. So that's why the argumentations often happen like that, where, for example, enumerators, Tangjenpa, are the ones who accept self-production, production from self. Madhyamikans don't accept that. Okay? And then at a certain point, they said, the words, the self-production is released. There is no I don't have my own assertion here or something. So, which is meant that I don't accept self-production in my system, right? But that requires the contextual meaning interpretation. So when you don't decode the meaning that way, so it's simply saying that I don't have my own position, right? So this is how a lot of the debates are contingent upon the decoding the meaning of the words in the original Indian text, treatises.
Repeat number JBS. Ranshingi Heja, the same Namja Kele, Nobutuki, Samamuji, Nirakanis. Tanya di Maji, Jitabe, Sema the Heja Kelane, the Omawarangi, Chigol Dribe, Ngakwe, gone, Tinzi Yantagi, the one we told over shadows. That team that did that teade, Rava. Round Tado Mujo Omavana Yishirawa. Round thing, the Tazo Chen did two Marity, Mata Maji, Tanya di Shashi or Taran, Semitop Sigores. That is on Lude.
Along Rus, tangible So although the Jayananda and followers and many of the early Tibetan masters who aligned with their viewpoint, critique the Prasangikas that you don't have your own real position because you don't have the perfect syllogistic reasoning. You are simply using consequential syllogistic reasoning, tenjur, okay, and all of that. But from Prasangika's perspective or the viewpoint, they said that we don't have a position that is contingent upon intrinsic reality. Okay? When we said we don't have a position, what we mean is we don't have a position that requires or that involves intrinsic existence or reality. But conventionally, we have our own position because our position is based upon that all things are merely labeled. There is no such thing as something existing in and of itself or objectively. Everything is merely labeled. So on that ground, we have our own position, right? Conventional reality. That's what we accept.
And the Tatana Rangiba Minjo and Maji travel go semi-gon job, she said was, she said that Tadon Shago Mars, Madame Jide travel go Shago, she had a Rangi Regmaris, or the Lenjacos. That moves your mouth is that.
So what they say is that accepting what is known as a perfect syllogistic reasoning, Tagayanta, Tibetan word, does not necessarily require that you accept intrinsic reality. Okay? Because that's the assertion of the Jayananda, right? They said you have to accept autonomous reasoning, which is basically intrinsic reasoning. If you accept what is called perfect syllogistic reasoning, you must necessarily accept. But they say, you don't. Okay? Because perfect syllogistic reasoning is based upon what is conventionally regarded as valid, right? We base upon the conventional validity, we could have perfect syllogistic reasoning. It does not necessarily involve intrinsic reasoning and autonomous reasoning.
더 롱루 딩마데 힐리게서 와 다다데 지다 피지 롱루 노르데도 데 팅고레 와 디 롱루 딩마데 이바데 가발레 힐레세 룩 더보 가마 다데 자야니다데 가지 주베 데기 룩다르 룩 다게 세미 드베 다 세미 모드베 규세키 테네 규세 테네 리고 마인데스 데다나 나타 골치고 니가 세미 주시고서 시 데베 로라야 시골 주바 나고지 마시나 따스면데 봐 마인베 유제티 나고라 세미 주바고 미기베 셔다 시고이 시고히 심미시비 세미 머드비 세미 주바 미시버 조나 시 동디 켈랑바야 미시베 파루부 켈랑베 고네스 야니 고바 소장 메데비 셔디 스타디르 고 스타디 데세라와 에디 켈랑고 세미 주바 자이시고메 니 시고 세미 주바 소자고 마르바스 인 소조 뉴지 디 세미 조데 테아요 마리스 그래서 소조 에디 카사 티 데시워 카사 세 라베이나 켈랑 카사 인 겨와테 마지오 카르스 라베이나 티이나 티 디구무두스 어티 카데카르세나 데시오라 아니 바로 켈랑베 고는 고세나 티고 마르바스 그래서 바로 디 켈랭베 그런 켈랭고 여바 소조 켈랭도 삼나 엔 코켈랑이 하고 마르바스
실로고
데 파건도 다디 제르비 라고다 자야네데 바로 세메드고 건데 바로 켈랑 세메드고 샤고 마리 그래서 바로 데데지 세메드고 뭐지 시고 마리 나고 시고 줄래 아니 데데 세메드고 하고 마리 가서 그래서 다디나 저는 켈랑 나게 되는 가는 지금도 아니 바로 켈랭도 삼소바타지 코 켈랭이 하고 말았어 소 투야 여러왔어 코 켈랭이 저는 세메드고 말았어 다 내가 나기 콜이야 켈랑나게 데데 도세 소소 뉴지로 당가시나 뉴지 소소 세메드고 켈랑지고 거시나 뉴지 타제에 바로 내가 먼저시 가면서 그러고 왔는데 근데 저런 게 켈랑 맞다니 고세야 돼 지금도 세메드고다 켈랑 보고도 고세야 돼 리파트 도로나 찍어지게도 그래서 세미 줘서는 그런 능가고 싶은 세미 시고 말스가 되는 계란 거는 가봐 밑에 바로 이제 계란 거 예미 신고 말이스 이 바로 계란 거 수도 신고 말아 신고 말아 다케 말한다서 계란 거 도스 뇌지 인습 뇌지 주나 그 뇌지 로면서 되도 와 뇌지 로 신고 말아
그래
어디서 왔다
이 코스게 다 가장 잘 안하는 게 저번에 갈라다 뒤에 체스 가다디 배나 가르쳐 그렇게 텐유 양다 거네 파종옥에다 더발이야 겨왔대네로 와게 점가토버디 근데 지금 말 가서 파종옥이 치고역이 있어 가서 더발 가려 이메데 체면 루비어 말 두두고 말 신선 신문 것이야 말 라이들
어디 코텔라 제가 체면 남야 지금 말이스 코텔라와 체면 남야시는 바로 뭐 켈링도 체면로 딕두고 말이스 라와 텔 켈라자 이거는 디그레 라와 그 갈라래 세메 프레시브 고네 현 디고 말이 바로 뭐 세메 저도 저런 시고 말was 소소 너지 다지도 그 시고 말was
알아 세메 마도네 그 너지 다 건당시 디그 슬라버로
그러라 다디지도 단 딜파 고중 유드스 보고 있어 다시도 저런 켈하고 가서는 디고문도 하시 바로 뭐 켈랑 여봐도 소하고 말아 가라고 그거 말아 소소 다고 켈랑 나게 도서 타지 너지 되나 인데 노디에도 문에 들어서 하고 봐 소스메 줘요 말was 제가 켈랑 거든 뭐 세메 줘고 저으로 제는 문고서야 되죠 나게래 잘 유드 소무도 없어 유드 좀 봐라 어디 켈랑나 간지 그 바로 켈랑도 하고 그러라 그래 대학원이 바로 쌤 시행고 그러라 어디 시원에 켈랑서 고서야 김사시야 대야면 돼 어떻게 하면 돼 인 소소 뉴제데 뉴제 인슬라고 하시나 켈랑 기도 서나 그 뉴제 타지나 뉴제 레트메 하고 말아 그래서 저런 세메 좀나 에네 샤지 되고 말이 켈랑 건데 에네 전 되기를 디 십사시야 지금은 인가 찍바래 샤스고 딱 고슨 거는 좀 세야 되다
So we are on page 233 although it's not numbered but it's 233 where the main heading reads, refuting misinterpretations of the Sevatandika / Prasangika distinction. So refuting those positions, refuting the first misinterpretation then the second, and the third, and the fourth. So we are with the first, refuting the first misinterpretation on page 233. So as I was double checking with Geshe, just to understand here, I think one of the arguments that Jayananda made earlier on is that we can not make a refutation argumentation based upon a valid ascertainment of the other's position, okay? Whoever the other opponent is, right? We cannot make a refutation of argumentation based upon valid perception or valid ascertainment of the other's position. The reason given at that time was that because to know that, you don't have the ability to read others' mind. So we really don't know exactly that other person, right, validly assert whatever the position is. So that's one of the arguments that Jayananda made early on. Okay, but the argument can simply be based upon not the valid ascertainment, but based upon just assertions, right? People have different assertions or viewpoints, right? Viewpoints. So that's what the Jayananda said. So now a parallel argument is made here. So, so in this case also that, we don't have the ability to read others' mind, as you said, that we don't know what is their real assertion. We just simply could be speculating it. So sometimes if you think this is other person's position, but they may not having that position at all, or you are trying to make an argumentation to kind of find holes in their position, but you really don't know because according to you, we don't read others' mind. So that, that explanation should be applicable to both sides, which is whether we make argumentations based upon valid ascertainment or we make argumentations just based upon somebody's assertion. Yeah. So I think some kind of parallel argumentation is made here. That's why I said it's kind of a little tricky. Hopefully, as Geshe explained more, it became clearer. Sometimes how we have to wait a little bit more so that things get a little clearer. If not, I'll again ask one more time, Geshe. Yeah.
Oh, did that. 제가 바로 계란에서 소리 가져가고 있어서 바로 그데다 되도 힘이 무슨 얘기야. 시다 매바 계란 망이 비치다. 현세 비시 비시로 시다 따다리는 바로 계란 나게도 해야 되게 날 제세 저 통제세 계란도 상고를 어디 삼니파 나서 바로 책을 내 되네 매버리마도 대화 국선들이 이미 수하고 말았어.
네.
그 무의미한데 소송하고 말아. 진짜 당기 지고 열세면 저 미게데 세면 저 비게 현실 미시체서 당기 나오송아. 어다 뒤고스동 거로. 근데 저 켈라시나 바로 켈링도 삼가지. 그래서 나 다타가 있을라인다. 다고 다타가 켈리고서 됐어. 삼그러와. 어때서 그래마도 오늘 자서 그 셈 같이도 하고 말았어. 그래. 진짜 켈라건 거가 되게 비도스. 어디 찍시 다 잡았으면 좋았어야 돼. 딱 그때도 해당 로가래. 근데 난도 된들라시 매도 더 예배 신랍주잖아. 그것에는 딜라로와 상마 되어 상마 매우 잡아줘도 유두 탐질에 더 있는 매우 잡아줘도 뭐 라사게서. 다 뒤처럼 하로 샤시거라. 하우던 가서 된들라시 매도 시스는 아니 상마 빼시니 근데 뒤에면 잡아주고 뭐 상만 땡데 뒤에면 잡아주고 뭐 니가 무슨 돈도 열어 도와매니가 돈도 열어 제 도구야 민다 그게서 선들이라고 상만 지워된 뒤에면 잡아게를 봐도 이제 탑지는 게 메주가 녀도 말했지 제 니문도 라서 어때도 뒤처럼 배 저런게 다한다고 동시에 누수고 간지 가르주고요 백 가르고요 주사 가르고 하고 들어갔지 단단 주야 되는 상만도 들으면 셔도 말이 상만 준비리 상만된데 들으면 저거야 말이 인니가 무슨 또 살이 주야 되거든 된데라 매유 잡아 주거라 되게 매유 잡아 제대로 주고요 뭐도 상만다 법받을 때는 되어다 시베다 메다 잡아 주고 말이 셔도 저런 게 유드 탐지 예반죠 마이스 내가 상마다보다 범바다비 잭된데 시바다부터 바다 되어며 저왕이부터 유드 탐지 예반 주고 말라라 저런 거 따야 내가 남자하고 따래서 다 주자 가지고 백 가지고 하고 만들려고 그러지
Okay, so hopefully this makes it clearer. One of the arguments Jayananda made early on is that you cannot, it's almost like effective refutation of others' position because you really don't read their mind. So you have no way to figure out validly what is this other person's position. Okay? So that that's what Jayananda says. So in which case that even if somebody says, for example, that sound is permanent, right? We just can't simply, based upon what a person has said. Maybe the person is just making a devil's advocate here, right? Maybe the person already believes that sound is impermanent, but he or she is simply saying sound is permanent. You mean? So you said, if we require an ability to read others' mind, that ability should be applicable in this particular case too. How can, that means nobody can make a refutation of each other's positions because nobody has ability to read each other's mind, Whether that is your real position or you're just simply being a devil's advocate or what is it, So that, explanation is not feasible. Okay. Now the next one, I think one of the arguments they made is that in the case, it's something to do with the logical privation. In the case of when we say a part is impermanent because it's a product, right? Anything that is a product or produced must necessarily be impermanent, right? There has to be privation, logical. Okay. And so another example of perfect syllogistic reasoning, Ta is we often say it, on that hilltop, there must be fire because there is smoke. For example, just like the fire in the kitchen. Okay, and so according to this, the critics, they said, this reasoning, where there is a smoke, there is a fire, that privation is not established. What he says is that, the logical privation only applies to the fire in the kitchen. Okay, because a fire in the kitchen, are you with me? It doesn't establish that wherever there is a smoke, there is a fire. That has to be logical privation. But this other critic, whoever the argument is making, says that's not the privation. He said you cannot forever say that where there is a fire, smoke, there is always a fire. Yeah. But in this particular case, they said the privation is only applicable to this particular instance, the case story, which is the fire in the kitchen. Okay? Because you can see the smoke coming out, right? But, so here, our position is that means you really have not understood what perfect syllogistic reasoning means, Ta Yang Da. Okay? Because there's no need to use any syllogistic reasoning to prove that the fire in the kitchen, right, has a smoke, because this is something you can see directly. We only use reasoning to infer something that we cannot see, right? And so the privation must belong to that. Wherever there is a smoke, there is a fire. In this particular case, we said on the hilltop, there must be fire, or there is fire, actually, we said, because there is a smoke. Yeah. So you did not understand the logical privation. The privation is a universal privation logic, not privation in regards to the fire in the kitchen, because there's no need to use reasoning or inference with something you can see directly.
this is totally matter. And someone the mail to Chavang is a ship, but the Shiva and Bazar Shavang is a shiri. And someone to someone may Chavata, Pumbe Shiva, Pumbe Shower Jovaina. In that, the Chava, don't someone to your Chavati, without the Pumbe Shiva for Shower Jovaina, tell any Chava the best guru, Chava the best guru, best Shiba character. To the last made and someone she laughed, Tia may charge of my someone to me Chava Jory Sena, and the bed Harishaka. No, the mayor Chava bed someone Shakasura, could you chat someone for Shagura, or the other. To that someone the best guru, or the best Shiba Harishaka, don't ask what that.
디 페나긴 단다 봄바치제 가서 메다데 제베체 소 만만 건도 자수지 메다데 제베체 페나 봄바치스 라고 오케이 디게시 제베타 캬바디 가서 봄베타를 샤베나 답에 샴바치고 또 까와신스 라고 가죠
this was the 분배 시발 분배 메타 샤바 줘 모두 시발 메타 샤바 줘 말라라.
알로
로.
알레 올레 차에 된데 집에 밑에 잡아
딜라 좀 시다 시발 메타 샤바 줘 말이 분배 시발 분배 메타 샤바 줘 라라. 딜 자외나 인다 딜 인 투배 가르샤 가세우다. 부바 코너 줘서 그런 부바 셨는 좀 봐라. 어제다 샤바 지가 빼셔 요 말아. 문에 저는 드들라 집에 도와이 배는 상마기 라시 메타시오지 배는 범바시 쓰고는 다 열어와. 어디 거디 로말라와. 이 먼저는 다 코인티 두야 부배시라 메타베 차와줘다. 에네 상마한테 매우 사줘야 에네 뒤빼레레 알리처럼 빼사베레 샤다스고다. 형도 빼드 샤도가 바로. 어디서 거.
So I think as by the extension of that logic, say on the hilltop there is a fire because there is smoke, just like the fire in the kitchen. If the assertion is that the logical privation between smoke and the fire is only established on the basis of the fire in the kitchen, then what kind of example can you provide to demonstrate that? Because you wouldn't find an example, because that's a standard example. We said there is a fire on the hill because there is smoke. For example, fire in the kitchen. Or let's say when we say sound is impermanent because it's a product, just like a pot, right? So if the logical privation, what is product must be impermanent, is only established on the basis of the pot, then what called concordant or tumbe, favorable example can you give to illustrate that? Because you wouldn't find one. Okay.
that tumbe said ninga better and that the mind that just look shooting the ganga just was go or the go race. Say Chava does it. That someone give me to Chava join. And someone to someone you will do more. She that didn't do more. And Pedro Yomara. Or this.
Yeah, so if the logical privation is established on the basis of this one particular case example, whether it's a fire in the kitchen or the pot, then that privation cannot be applied universally, isn't it? We cannot say that whatever is a product must necessarily be impermanent, or where there is a smoke, there is a fire. We cannot make that universal kind of a claim or claim.
That request that goes to request the chain and the Koran device that the cemetery of Nasha may say, keep to us that, but the cemetery of Nasha charge over. When the Kelang get Eastern and the cemetery is a shabbatil Inga because a powerful some good Hako Jibashakadua. Jibashata in cemetery of Nasha may Kelang shine, says the Regumarva, Jibaredua. The Jiba in the cemetery of Nasha may Javasama Yamari, Tendela met the Yamari. Later you may that the Yamari say, "Oh, the Tiaganga Gata is that Seminam Yashin and Digit was your country."
So which means that to use a perfect syllogistic reasoning, Tayanda, there is no need, for anybody to be able to read other person's mind and figure out that he or she, validly, subscribes to that position. Or there's no need for us to have the ability to read somebody's mind to understand his or her assertion or the viewpoint. We could use syllogistic perfect reasoning, Tagyanda, based on conventionality,
Oh, gee, that the Shiva shows that Javasama Yosho, that same mother of Goshiko Kelang was some Chuvai, Himo, young medic. Kelang was some you didn't see the parable. 미국은 이제 싫어. 바로 계란을 그런 계란은 바로 내가 너도 고빙 해와요 말아.
네.
그런 계란은 누지 저기면 고통 말아.
나르마.
어디서 그래? 다 누지 저거는 그 계란을 생고로 와.
나르마.
이 생고는 시고디 그거고디 바로 계란이 생고로 와.
나르마.
이 생고는 현수시면 무시고 그 사람들 거기 생고로 와.
네.
어디에 리포트도 제스로 와. Tati ke paru kiba je ti ke lambe tone mindropala semane rahi ga be shiro so di se da kono ke lang di ke lang ba to be semane chigu gila ya mar ma ko gila ya mar ti be da go je sama de pang da de je ya mar o di me do da
so when we let's say, neither, as we said, in the debate, there's the one who asks the questions and then the one who answer or respondent, right? Neither of them have the ability to read each other's mind. So which means they cannot engage in any kind of argumentation, debate, or syllogistic, or whatever the case may be. So their assertion that we have to validly we have to, how should I say, understand precisely what valid position other person is making. So that is asking too much, because nobody has the ability to reach others' mind. But that said, we still could assert the notion of what we call inferential valid cognition, which is based upon reasoning. Right? There is no need for anybody to have the ability to reach each other's mind, but still we could have valid reasoning based upon which we can have inferential valid cognition of phenomena. Because ultimately, when we try to, in argumentation, how can we decide what is right or wrong, or what is the valid or not? There has to be the notion of validity, isn't it? So there's such thing as valid cognition. If there's no such thing as inferential valid cognition or valid cognition per se, then there's no way to make decision. What is right, what is wrong.
Chenani Tetaran Jevayang, Kelangi Yuzenji, Jenani, Rujata Songla, Sema Yumi, Jenani, Sema Mevan de Yamsos, Direta, this is the Corona Yang Yusum Jisheni. Kelan la Chabar Chia, Chen, that Kelan the Regiment Category, the Regiment Cato Marisia, the Chava Shagres, my Ganga Maris line the Roa. Jolandi, Dovjeva, Jenani. 대달 쳐봐 다 드레디나 이 쳐봐 지지 이 쳐마 고글 미기 제가 수수서는 쳐봐 지야요 말와 대니랑 이렇게 쳐봐 지야 쳐마 켈인데 그러가스 딜레는 이 켈나 잡기 가그리면서 지 세면어야 미세야 게로도 쓰다 가지
알아 세면어야 메일 라브르베
그 세면어야 요머서 세바 강가 이 칼사 켈나 잡기 돈시올라로와 불사에 탐자로와디
디 단다 뒤주 책인데 자 안한테 말아와
자 아니데 누가 어디 데리 직발돼요 직발
알로로서
대가나래다
알아 yeah I think way back when we talked about this Jayananda's one of the main theses of the positions make is there is no such thing as semenamsha valid perception or valid cognition. And when people engage in argumentation debate, they are simply trying to critique each other's assertions and refute them. So there is no valid cognition. And so that viewpoint is refuted because there is such thing as valid cognition. Otherwise, how can we differentiate between truth and false, or right and wrong? It has to be ultimately. The decision has to be made based upon a valid cognition. Otherwise, we wouldn't be able to, differentiate between them.
Oh, dear, that doesn't say any look the government said that. That look you but the dira, Tade almost had dira. Look ye but governess, tongue, the corner you shave, Gazo, Rangi maybe Tamja came in, but Rangi Tamja Minja told in Zedis. Rangshi Yumi Jebe, Rihigi, Tamjati, Mundrape, Tamjati came in by Ina. When the Dikona in the Jebe, Gabi Bishir, also good, and Tamja came in like they were kind. Tell that look ye but the Dikona Jebe, Rangshi maybe Tamja came in, but Rangi Tamja. rangi tamja minjo be deba tes jwa da rangi me wa inde dewa yin da rangi tamja minjo dego de da khare se rangi yimi je be ri yin tamja di minjo sigore ti minjo be tamja di ini kebele sigore wonde tamja di ti khoni je be ka yin be she da su 민도 대 티코는 집에 가임비 시선 다동지에 값 최고로 거리시는 탐자 게임에는 내와이 당보다는 러시메바 탐지에 통데 리히게 민도나 러시여바 탐지에 통데야 이 리히게 미그와 저데 유즈 송비셔로스 어디운다 다 러시메세야데 데서 러시메세야데 세메 처음에는 근데 rangi yuba se ka to mara kanje ko ni ngongi bendi ngongere yorwa ka to mara was kasa wonde tingi chebe ka yibi shirshi tas konen tamja khele bande tamja khemene bande bayina tambodan rangi me tamja don rihiji 저는 rangi tamje ki muga jodi gezo som shoro kede to de kana je ka rangi ba tamje to yang mehu so he 양의 현디어 미리데 나 리바나 제바시바데다 룩 리바 이노 시마웨 셔다 마제 비시베 현기 룩 샤바 미니 현기 룩나 가버미니 베셔다 현도는 롱룩기 담자 메디지 메기 세지 고디 현룽고비 텐주여 메디 베셔로스 다티임다 더 콘도데 티임다 딱동 제네네 메바들 샤고에서 현우랑 루시아디 샤고에서와 어때 션 되게 말이야 딱도 제디 셨는데 현우랑 되게 말이 맞아봐 셨는데 아니 가가 되게 버봤어 어찌저다 저런 데 십자시야디 tenyu 데 시야디 아니 담자디 되게 문두스 다디들 다들 엄마 바시 시야지 라서와 자야 안가 지버라디 지버 다
콘저 저버다 되게 니바대로 와게 가르라고 할 수도 가라 딱던 세네 신루도 랑루 샤워레스 거로
다 건데 콘데 디스거라 건데 인데 딱동 젠 데스거라 갔다 나 자야 아니다 지바대로 와래 딱동 젠 샤는 요마디 마지마 타니들 요 샤는 요리 샤다 딱동 젠 메니바디 랑지 메롱 시레티 Dubja dona iron you bada dubja duji kilonzavina in the tenjuas.
Oh, there one.
There are
No.
or teaching the Raymond did it, that did you but it.
But the ten again, attended again, go so much again. But
Tadeo Omaba said it, I need that just drunk it.
In a conjure dojo digging, the conjure tenju but the Doctor Sene, Ranglish, and can just shagamaras, Dichabina, Casata, Rangu Diana Calabres. That demon, Doctor Mazen and Shabin and Digu Marsgore.
Oh, Doctor said, Kataka Shagore. Just a research is not a kill and Shagore, to the Gia Mary Shagore, Condes. Oh, do that the Gia and the Gasha Namsha Yomara.
I don't know, and my Yomaras
or it is that.
Ale Doctor Zeni Shagore, Doctor Zeni Shag man and it because some of your Yomaras. And Doctor Mazabe want to Shago.
Mazabe got the Shago, any Tachara Jupta Tishago workers. Jupta Kaya take my take you, Lola. Jupta the Jupta Pet to the house and Rangi do this. That back home, I cannot dash in the carre.
I think you
is last one. Or did you over that?
Not really. The chicken and the truth. I think I have got something blocked somewhere. I got half of it, but half of it is getting normal. I'm just want to understand what I'm doing here. That Penadanda de Pug, Namara Dira, and look the double zero again. Kerazo Lolia, Anne Casata, Tai and Daku and the Ravagain. Doctor saying, Nebulu Shagor and Manibulu Shagores. Casam. Manibulu Shav and the Super Shipper Yomaras, Cantata Nebu again. That Doctor said, Nebulu Shav and any Tantacasa Rajil Killing was Dilla again.
That you lose shadow, that the Raju Red war. Could they just that and the Chibari Gaga kill us and show
that you can continue loving what I
this word that other did the 다들 엄마세요. 제가 그러다. 남게 다들 엄마가 들어와. 다들 가게도 제대로 보시고 그러. 어디와 어디서
제는 뭐 지금 다들 오마 발로 와게. 저랑서 샤 다른 제네 샤고래 맞아봐 샤고래. 다들 맞아봐 샤베네 아니 좀저서 시고라 야마레스. 다른 제네 샤베네 아니 가서 랑규 다이다 켈는 거 스틸 거로.
엄마 바랑 고드베 나게 그 땡지야다 뎀바메 조조 셰도 대단한 런지메도바니 마지베 지데 타고 체메 이건조 셰셰도서 니바티가 발 당목티가시 단다 예바 티가발 힐 룩통부 가버든 로차시 다다데 룩 예바디가 와들발
다 제는 뭐 지금 단다 케바 가서 오마바디가 가인 거로 와게. 저저 롤이야 ana taqdan sene nyebe lo sen shago ra manye beres manye benen ke shesa yamares nyebe lo yemanen en rangyu ta ya da kasada rang sen ro khelen gores ke
o de is de kharsa lo ni pa ga ba ne te khone je be ka ro shi me be tamja khe menen ba ro yi ye tamjo minjo be dong din de ba des ro ene de ro shi me Rajime tamja ke mene basi dizala ene rajime metro basi gorwa rajime metro ba raji tamja menjo be to ndebati raji tamja yomari karsa yomari la rati dudu zana da ene rajime ba ke mana she ene raji tamja mena chikhan be re do mare re do chikhan me re do ro this is what Deva the Ranji image Rishi Tamja Jobe Semati Kel Lemelina wounded Dicona the Chebe Kaibe he does go Tamja Kel came in the Deva Kais.
Quando tardan sempre luce come che ran luce lu kan
Da koyo dele da 너도 엄마 나기 당은 제베서 니기베 지도 타이도 요새 계속 시외서 말아. 그 그냥 매번 좀 지래다.
아네.
때문에도 세다 농도 당도 시고 그러서 어떻게 있어. 저도 저는 제가 인다. 러이 이미지 리 탐자디 문도바 탐제는서다 러이 이미지 베리히스다 태권도 집에 리히라와. 어디 이 탐자디 누구 말씀 문도에서 케멜라미 수여다. Won't the coil jebe kaime shirse tasgo good tamja came in the vice what is it that in Roger image hit motor by the any carsa came Roger the motor in anyway carsa di kele mes ire ona titeva di medi ti cognel jebe kaime shir he tasgo 네 tamja kemen dewa yishe wa ta ti kona ni le jebe kai be she na ta do jebe ka ra ta do jebe ka li na rong ji win de te ji bo sui na ni ya yo mo ji ba ra
ro ba
ji ba ra de ba de ko ra ta gi ne kar sa ti khade ji na rong ji ba ta ti me den te ji mi ji kha ba de ji go ma ra ta ka je to go ma ra ba ji ba re ro wa ti se da je to mo do si ta bo ta ne rong ji me ba tam ji be ton de Rishi Mundona Rashi Yoba Tamseve Rashi Yoba Tamseve Tomade Rishi Kiba Minjur this direct. That cause Rashi Meva Tamsayati Tamsa the Rashi Meva the any Terawa Rishi Murdo the Rashi Meva Rishi Dugurajada Dugura. Rashi Meva Rishi Dugumen Rashi Yoba Kato Mars, Rashi Biasurago. Rashi Yoba 탐제 동의 가서 문도나 디디 리시기 문도나 디 리시디 브라 나시 여바 카토 마레시 유제 총배셔로 세제다 거지 러시기 여바 까모지 에네 러시 여바 까모도 러시 미에서도 도토야 여마라
나로바
러시 여바 까는 리마 도로 러시 여바 까모도
리마 토스게 다디로 디트게 마모서로 가 토스
러시 여바다 러시 미가 문게로와 문게다 찍주는 찍까 그러지 디니 그냥 버는 까야 여마라 저런 대신에 디 러시 메가 세메 모터 이제 러시 여바 까야 민도스 거대셔서
라
Kelang Zangremodo is Semi Show Marwa.
I don't know.
Oh, the Dutch Raji of a gas, Kayam, Raji, we walk on sweet who do us. This is what.
No. Okay, in the best ships torso, I think there was so much exploration, it just got dispersed completely. I had something solid, and then it got completely got dissipated into the space. Okay, so I'll double check and try to simplify what I understood. That again, how could get Sirona? Okay.
Yes.
That under the peer, Nama in the Gija, another rule that timber channel again. Cemetery when I'm saying Yama Resla, again. City of that general Krangi, Rangu, the Shan Lucia, do got Tagden, Saber, Luch and Shago, and Mother Lucha Shago, rest again. Tagden, the Sene Casa, Mania Lucha, and Geshe is a she Yama, rest. Rigi,
Raji, we were semi Maruna, Raji of a gas and car.
The Yama, rest.
That
Tagden saying, never Lord Chavina.
That you told you. I did the call take it. That don't the year maybe she has here.
Alexander or 1,000 years. Okay, hopefully this works out. After all that, going back and forth. So there are some of the what we call current Madhyamik and Tibetan Madhyamik masters. Anyway, their viewpoint aligns with Jayananda's. So here's the thing, and we need to keep this thing in there, otherwise we can completely get lost. I was lost so much. I thought, what's happening? The one assertion is there is no such thing as valid cognition. Okay, just like Jayananda said, and these masters also believe there is no valid cognition. Okay, so they don't accept valid cognitions. Okay. And so if that's the case, then the Gyeltsen Rinpoche is making this argumentation with them that when you make a distinction between one's own position or assertion and that of others' position, right? Is that premise upon the belief that something has to be findable under rational analysis or not findable under rational analysis? Are you with me so far? Okay. If it is premised upon the belief that something is not findable under rational analysis, then in your position, because you don't accept valid cognition, then nobody can forever validly cognize the absence of intrinsic reality, isn't it? Existence. Which means there is no antidote or there is no way to get rid of the belief in intrinsic reality, because you don't accept valid cognition. Are you with me so far? I might have repeated a few times. It's okay. I'll do that. Okay. And if something you said is premised upon the belief that something has to be findable under this analysis, then that means you have to accept intrinsic reality. Whereas according to them, nothing should be findable under rational analysis. Jayananda says it. This Tibetan master says, okay. So their position is nothing should be findable under rational analysis. Okay? And if nothing is findable under rational analysis, then, the perception validly, right? Validly, reaches that conclusion or that perception, because you don't accept valid cognition. So if there is not valid cognition of emptiness of intrinsic reality, then there is nothing to counteract, right, the belief in the intrinsic reality. So that's why there is a problem in your assertion. But if you say it is based upon something findable under rational analysis, then you have to accept that things exist intrinsically. Okay? Are you with me so far after all of those, wrangling back and forth? Okay. No skin.
Oh, this is no. Kete tikone de jiba ka raji ba thamji be thom migu se ta raji me se ba raji ba thamji ba khig ma se nyan de ni khin me de nga rigba nam je na ba je ba de helu khig che mo we she da ma ji be shi be she yi lu ga ba ni be she da she de na rong lu je se thamja min de je me yi se shi go de se helu la go be ten ju yang min de she ro se she da Hungokwa izam se adi citizen that is the one. Rigbe Jevashine Goyaji, Rigbe Jevashine, Hungo was. Rigbe Jevashi Hilukana, and the Semashi Namja Dego was. Timena, Hunga was a room, yes, I do more was. No, there was a Jevashina. or did you race it? Java, the load the Hima, the Majibi Shiva Shingi, low number occurs low now, government new share down. Java machine, the Hindu Gaya Maris, Java. Take that Dembashi. Shedan Hin did not wrong look, yes, Tamja Miji. Tamja made Midaje, make you say she good. Hilu line go be 10 years on David Sheros, or did Hilu go be 10 years on David Sheros. So that Rolu Tigo Messia, Hilu Kaya 10 years to go. Tina in the wrong lad, Tiyedewata, so Yedera, or did take him to see that's the same.
Again, the drink it comes toast dinner goes again. That horses the drink soon to share. That was a some of the doctor stick was again, should it? That's the bell ask. So the point here is being made is that if you do accept analytical investigation, analysis, or critical thinking, then you must accept such thing as valid cognition, right? The presentation valid cognition, because it is through analytical reasoning that we try to establish reality as it is, or to refute the wrong assertion with regard to that. And so that necessarily entails that you must accept valid cognition. That's what Jen was telling them. If you don't accept valid cognition, then there's no way to refute belief in the intrinsic reality, because there's no way to validly perceive or realize absence of intrinsic reality. We just antidote to that, right? So so when in the argumentation, when people say this is my system of position and this is yours, so analytical reasoning is used. Critical intelligence is to be able to establish things validly, and so valid cognition must be asserted, in that sense. So I request the Geshe that please try to bring together at home all the things we talked about today, because it was it just completely got dispersed, I think, somewhere.
That is a Chihuahua, that one.
Talk to us, can you deny me that? I didn't know about all this in a thought station.
That's what this is. Gaja Muzi the Shiva, Zorava. Gaja Muzi, Gaja Muzi, do this any medallion, do them Mombo, Gione. Or to get the Karsa, that tema, any do that look his doa.
No, so.
Didn't look his or not that said, so Gaja Muzi, Medima look his. Rava, Gaja Muzi, do you don't. Move needs to go, the movie country with Joe. That semi tomatoes, the Gangatina Legra, or Digas. So that country sent that to the country contact this or that is Ganga be that two more motivators in the red water, to that direction. Or that Karishan way, two more Korasham, cemetery, and Sham, don't know that dinner to go. So I was asking Geshe just to kind of bring home, what's the key points, the take-home kind of lesson from here, because we talk too much and there's so many things here. So all of these things, really, the main point is identifying precisely what we call the object of negation. Okay? And so we find many different assertions with regard to that, and actually Geshe said 4 different assertions with regard to identifying the object of negation, Gyeltsen in Tibetan. Okay? And the things we talk about today, I think their position is that things exist for mistaken perceptions, but they really don't exist. Okay? So that's their position. Things exist for mistaken perceptions, but in reality, they don't exist. And they don't accept the notion of valid cognitions. So they don't accept the notion of something that is valid or something that's invalid. They don't accept that kind of a notion. Chungol semes. Chungol shen yamares. Semen namsha yamares. Semen namsha shimundo. Tata kaya ganga tere ko da.
No. Semen namsha lengu gures.
That kondo disine 체면주변에 shagun다 해랑다 대대좀 하고 말와.
Mlade.
다 던데 체면주와 제동신 두고로 어디 두고 두야 되도.
I think our own position is that valid cognition is important, or valid cognitions do exist, and one must accept that. Whereas the opponents of today's debate, they don't accept valid cognitions, and so they said things exist for mistaken perception consciousness, but in reality they don't exist.
줍자줍 또고는 체면 또고와. 가자 가고는 아니 체면 가야 되면도 제가 저도 요 말이야 요르세야는 팬도 요 말아. 그래서 체면이 또고와. 디크스다.
So for us, when we say how should I say refute others' positions, that's also based upon analytical reasoning and valid cognition. And when we assert, something, that also based upon the valid cognition and reasoning. And when somebody says they don't accept valid cognitions, then it's basically he said, she said. I mean, he didn't say that, right? So there's nothing we can differentiate between what's right or wrong. He said, she said, and both are right, or wrong, for that matter. He didn't say that. A footnote, by the way. He said, she said. Yeah, yeah. So Geshe said, maybe if you ask questions, maybe things might become clear. He has opportunity to clarify things.
I'm going to start with a question.
Oh, yeah, you're there. Okay.
Yeah, the issue of not accepting valid cognition is because they assert that things exist by way of their own character, and then at the same time they're saying they don't accept valid cognition. So then how are they labeling anything?
Okay. Malakandi should this again. Phuntsok ane kasa gore rangshin juba ke lengyo mare wes roba ke rangshin juba rangsinyi juba
rangsinyi ke lengo mo ta tenjo insiya derwa stike lengo
ala jana go tenju bin la go roba ke
re ha tenjo go xiaxi ko xiesa de xie gorda
jana de nganzu tenju bin ina rangju ga ta ke len de go rangju
la jana ke lengo mare
re tenju da rangju min ge cheba de go roba ke rangshin juba ke lengyo mare ta rangshin mandu ba ke kaza konda rangshin mandu ba ke len ba ina roba ke ane di semen namsha ke malam de khande chabre so sada
세다 세면의 계를 여기 저래도 그래서 거기서 다 돼서 거까지 뒤도 세면의 계가 돼서 땅놀지에서 세면의 계 시고가도 그 가래 상구였다 에너지 가래도 대가 세배도 남자샤나 이 강사 편지지 가래 상구였다 누가 가 하고 말봐 하 뭐든 세매 좀 가야면 누가 하시고
ala jana da kona tenju bin so go roba
그런 되게 다 내가 쉬고다 이거 다 그냥 파스라 신인데
ina semen juba ane rangsinyi juba oh here's the interesting part. Jaya Ananda and his followers claimed themselves to be Prasangika Madhyamikins. So they said, that nothing exists intrinsically, okay, but so they said there's no valid cognition. If we accept valid cognition, then they said you have to accept intrinsic reality, and so that's the dilemma there. They said, we are Prasangikas. We said all things are merely labeled. Nothing exists in and of itself. But if something is validly perceived, then that thing has to exist intrinsically, and so they don't assert the notion of valid cognition. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah. Yes. Let me. Yeah. Sure.
This is an important point because Ananda sounded like he was debating with Prasangikas, even though he's obviously a Prasangika.
Yeah, he is Prasangika, right? Yeah. I think he said, I'm Prasangika, I don't accept anything exists in reality, and I don't accept valid cognition. If valid cognition exists, then whatever it sees, it must exist intrinsically. So from my point of view, the way we differentiate between Savatantikas and Prasangika is Savatantikas accept autonomous reasoning, and Prasangikas don't, right?
Yes. Yeah. So it's clear that the problem is that he deprecates valid cognitions and conventional reality, but he never says in this quote here, And even in the Gyeltsen Kappa's explanation, not until the very end. He never says that he doesn't accept valid cognitions.
Where are you on page?
Well,
Okay.
the quote is from the very beginning.
Okay, so when you say he never says, I don't accept valid
There's no statement that he does not accept valid cognitions.
226, did you say?
Yes.
Okay.
He does not say that there are no valid cognitions in general.
Okay.
That's not.
Okay.
So even Gyeltsen Kappa doesn't say that he says that.
Okay.
Until the very end, the very last sentence says that they assert that there are no valid cognitions. But what Jayananda has been saying all along is that the inference establishing the pervasion is not a valid cognition. That's a very specific, the inference that establishes that the predicate, rather the reason being a product is pervades the predicate being impermanent. That's what he's saying. It's a very specific valid cognition that he doesn't
I
accept.
understood half of it, so let me do it. So we are on page 226, and which quote?
In that quote, no, I'm just giving an example.
Okay.
There is no statement to the fact that he denies valid cognition.
Okay, so he
Does that what he denies is that the inference establishing that the reason pervades the product, the reason, the predicate rather. The reason
you mean that if anything is a product, it must be impermanent. He doesn't accept that.
This specifically, only this valid cognition, this inferential valid cognition that he denies.
Okay,
he doesn't deny every valid cognition in general.
Sure. Okay.
So I agree that maybe that's kind of starting on a slippery slope, that eventually he will deny all valid cognitions, but in general he doesn't really deny everything.
Sure. Quran ki siguro ke tanda di shung di lo rowa ke Quran sa ba ja ananda ki rowa ke ti chik di na tuen sha ba chana ane kar so gor da cheme nam sha shegi me ba de sebuch ke tung mi dos rowa ke ta kare dos di ka la ya ta ho de ba tan so she to ka pena tanda di rowa ke ka sa ta cha che je mi da de chebe che la rowa ke cheba ine mi da me khawa ya rowa ke ta cheba chema de rowa ke shegi me dos kora sa na rowa ti de de ba sa di ne ina ko ki chema chera ba je rowa ke me la ma de ji da cheme nam sha shegi me sla ba ma rowa so ke
마 제마 제바 세마 민두스 무슨 세마 민두로 가르스 제바 세마 메데 티 가르스네 분배 시발 분배 메다 샤바지 도르 지도 시발 메다 샤 도토 문도 와세라로 다 드늘라지 메도 시스 무슨 세마 민두로 라 정말 그 되어를 메요 샤바 무슨 도로
알레디 기타 알 슈르 된 거라
티마도 이게 도와는 매일 차와 로토고 문두스 상황이 지고 뭐 도와요 말이 세대 유도 탑지도 무주어 많이자 이니 도와는 매일 차와다 시바는 메다 차와들이 이 도야 되게 남자 민두도 왔다 가르스는 남자 매버 가르스는 고차 유도 탑지 무주어 예토 말이 가르스는 단다 상황이 되어 매일 차와 돌마듯이 지단 되어 매일 차와 돌
상황된 되어 매일 차와 돌 거 무슨 생각해 말하면 그 저거
무슨 생각도 하고 와 참아 요 말을 쓰고 와다 제바스면 매일 된다 가르치는 데서
자주집니다
다시 배다 심판 범바시라다 범바시바 범바미다 차와 돌마듯이 지도 시바다 차와 돌 무슨 대도 그런 단다 간도 쇼기 지단 시도 따한다 그 제격도야다 차바도야티 그런 거 맞으는 나와라 맞으지 나도 되들라지 매 더이 번 상황이 되들라지 매 대바 차도 뭐 상황 누구야 말아 상황 무슨 도요라 내가 샤지 미다 시베 본바이 시에서는 범배시바 범배다 샤바코는 또 사야 또야디 신는 배다 샤바도 그러면 범배시바 범배다 샤바 누구야 말아 어디 그런 하고라 어디 좀 리베형 댄지가 남자 샤면도 생각 가서
알아 단단하게 김제 딜시네 그랑기 다 가서 세면 남자 켈링 무슬람도 그랑기 세면 남자 켈링이 메스케 라비야 말았어
다 그런 거 세면 줘봐 두고 말을 라라 당연히 켈라다지 까고 세면 줘 두고 말을 라라 어디 있던 거다
Okay, so this is what Geshe's explanation is. Where I think it seems like embedded in the argumentation that went forth. You're right in the sense that he does not accept that, for example, a sound is impermanent because it's a product, right? Just like a pot. The privation between the product and impermanence is not accepted. So that means he does not accept inferential valid cognition. Okay? But where he also doesn't accept direct valid cognition is with regard to the second argumentation, which is on the hilltop there is a fire because there's smoke, just like the fire in the kitchen. Because he said that prohibition is only established on the fire in the kitchen, not in general. But which is denying because the fire in the kitchen with the smoke is something you can directly perceive. There's no need. So in that way, said that you are not how should I say, he doesn't accept the notion of valid cognitions, I should say.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then going back to this quote, in that Jayananda, what he's saying is that, so first of all, it's clear that he doesn't accept the inferential valid cognition, establishing the pervasion.
Right.
But he implies that there's a possibility for valid cognition of the reason being a property of the subject, meaning that it's possible that the sound is a product.
Right.
It's possible that somebody can understand that. What he's saying is that he doesn't know if the other person understands it, but he seems to imply that it's possible, and that's a valid cognition. That's a direct inferential valid cognition as well.
Oh, you mean that he assumes that maybe somebody knows that sound is impermanent because it's a product, right?
Yes. He simply doesn't know whether the opponent knows that.
Right.
But that means that
that is a possibility.
It implies
Yes.
that there is a possibility,
Yes.
which means he doesn't deny that.
Right. Yes. 알고는 돼서 다 되게 좁아 용다 채면으로 와게.
네.
지도 코란기 타치도 세면 남자 메시지 라베디 갈래갈래 지도 쇼르고만 더 와게. 코란 갈래 쓰기서나 비게 센센 세면은 요마로 와게. 미 가사 제다 받지기 베나겐 데로 와가서 차대 제바 인자 집에 좀제기 미다 하고 그 요스기로 왔어. 요 여매디 센센 쇼면서 하고 말을 와게. 이는 요 쪽으로 왔을 텐데 여위나 세면 남자지 고 켈레기 사자의 말씀 직사유서 됐어 그렇게.
덱스가 언더 신의 추선 세미도 세야죠 말에.
No.
다른데 그 추선 세미도 있고 그러와.
너나래.
진짜 세미도 세요 말이거든.
알래.
치고 되게 거기 뭐 하고 말아.
저 하고 그 매사 게다 하고 버제 유스기로 왔어. 그래서 되다게.
알레. 하고 다 코로나시는 됐어거래. 하고 말을 쓰디다 무엇이 건지 하고 말을 쓰고.
몰라 그래. 맞아. 저 여버제 유스기로 와게. 매버제 유스기로다.
예데 코로나 표시는 맨다 코로나 상황도 됐어거. 유대도 지금 그 하고 우리 그거는 무엇이라고 연구를 해봐도 다가스 직된 그 상황도 뭐도 말이지. 무엇이 되는 요 말을 와. 그 유대도 와. 이따 그 거기 데려다 중국어도 지금 비지 너도 너서 쳐야 된다고 그 장대 인사래. 정신 매사 지도 중국 전문 지금 그 세면나야 샤모도 지어라. 어디 내가 대 인사라고.
알래.
진짜 지 중국 생活 있어야지 뭐돼. 어디 지고 뭐 이제 정론이야 내가 시가고 쓰는 스테데 남샤면도 다가 정신 매바니 찍버려도 거다.
I think I think that's a lot of things is related to the position that things exist for mistaken perceptions. So those who accept that things exist for mistaken perception, they really don't exist. So they have a problem with the notion of valid cognitions. So that's where the issue is. Yeah. Sure.
Back to the first question.
Sure.
Well, even if he says he's Prasangaka, how's he labeling anything? How's Jayananda? How's he labeling anything if he doesn't accept valid cognition?
Okay.
So, I mean, it's as simple as you see a room, you see a sink, you see a toilet, you go, oh, that's a valid basis. So how's he? If there's no valid cognition, how are you going to say something is a valid basis, and then how are you going to label it?
Oh, I see. Then this will be the Jayananda Ravake. I'm Koranki Shabaji, nothing you by yes, Ravake. In a seminar, I'm killing Mesla Ravake. Chidukalia, and talk about thousand say the condition shot was a good because you may not talk about thousand shower. Talk about is the Koran Chidukalia, Daxis Samajala, Dogs Samajig Tower, Ravake. And then I'm shot the condition showers. What seminar Shamina?
I'll this that Zain the Koran 10 years in Sigurata, in the Gira. You turn the corner in the Kai Sigma, you don't take you the round you say humans. In several countries, could check you or the sugar was the top of task. I did that.
Seminam Shaman, top 1,000 the condition was again. And the Daxis Samala, Dogs Samagi Tag or what?
Did that teach you? Couldn't someone that Jigres, Marissa, Samajara, or Tekajigo Shama, you make as a came to top of task. I did the Namshad of Carson, top of Shadugan Shagora, that is your task. Top of task, you may as a get a human.
Al toba ala ye me ke shiga maras.
그 유미 계속 시고 또 다시야 또 다시 민시를 시고 이제 시고 이제 유미 그 유가
아니,
하고 말다 가지 먼저 나야 건가 중국을 저거로 와
어래.
내려와
다 중어 예 중어로 예스로 와게.
어디
지단 메스로 와게.
어디다 매워서 샤워
지디 가라디 베나 쪽제 라버데 중어로 요래서 와.
어디로
쪽제 예마디 중어로 또바 따버려 마도 지기. 그 요마스 걸다.
다 여봐 디마스도 매시 가르쳐나 땅동제에서 말이
안 다시 세마로 요마다.
다 디스고 다 코선 디스고 코 탱교 인사가시 뭐 이제 그 탱교 그런 탱교 랩토 말다 탱교 내가 하고 말아
라오.
다 탱교 뭐 있는 거 탱교 인도도 주고 와 어떻게 그 가르쳐나 가자 문제가 매우셔 조세데 숙디데 건 조세 매다 이 밑에 조세 매우서 차로
나래.
어디서다 어디 가제 문제가 매우셔
나오.
어디지 매우셔던다 민두라 왔다 문이 전서 연도 거
라로
지라고 와 내가 요마라
나오.
어디서 다 먼저는 가자 문제스야 지키 네가 차시 가가신 매버고 매버 줘도 말이 강사 차시 신는데 강사 다도 니어 말이 강사 요리 레상가 요리 차고로 와
나오.
그것은 되게 계자키고 말 딱도 연딱도 니고를 싫어
나래.
이하면은 매우 샤로
알로. 안 세면 남자 셰 요마다 다시 세마데 느끼지 거려 요마다.
어디서
With the Jayananda, of course, he claims himself to be Prasangikas, but he may not necessarily be Prasangika. He just claims himself to be one. And for him, things exist only for mistaken perceptions, but in reality, they don't exist. So, I mean, so the valid basis of imputation, valid labeling, all of those things really is not there in his position. For example, I think, as Geshe explained, why he asserts that things exist for mistaken perception but not in reality is he has not clearly identified the object of negation. For him, you said, that's a table, you know. Then, without identification, the object of negation with regard to the table, he said, okay, table, is it the top part, is it the bottom part, is that sideway, right? When he kind of, dissect the table, he couldn't find it, you see. That's why he said, table doesn't exist. So which become a nihilist position, right? But only when we identify precisely the object of negation with regard to the object, then we analyze it, right? What is not found is intrinsic reality, but the table is still intact, isn't it, right? So in his case, without identifying precisely the object of negation, he said, what is stable? The top part, the bottom part, the sideways, either, well, nothing is stable here. So he completely, denies the existence of the table at the end, So that's the issue, yeah. So it becomes a nihilist position. But we will stop there. Thank you very much. And by the way, the benefit of translating is that I think I feel much better. I was so sick. Yesterday I was in the bed. Today I thought I probably shouldn't come. And now I don't know. My sickness is gone, I think. I had high fever, I was sweating, and now it's all gone. The benefit of Dharma, I think. This is wonderful. That said, I think the next week again, your translator will be out of town, and so back to calm abiding with our Geshe translator. So this is a good thing. We have two translators. We can alternate. Kange lo de timye tinde ninda namda rasebe jinye dungun chishin suje nyeje dowa mendom dungen yezebe dozo gunla dodan jero nyemo nyelo leje sharo cheze je mare meze dong jinye jeze rade nam dene daje saju daze yende lunzo jeze Juda, Juni, Jende, Dalu, Jambe, Yang Long, do Omara Bazana, Omara Bazana, the Senden, Chuji, Kera, Verse, Dalu, Temo, Mimba, Kadan, Tenje, Shunlun, Toba, Lord Bove, Nawan, Zendo, Lord Yazu, Virun, Begard, Esan, Bove, Page 21. Obeisance to my Guru and Protector Manjushri, who holds at his heart a scriptural text symbolic of his seeing all things as they are, whose intelligence shines forth as the sun, unclouded by delusions or traces of ignorance, who teaches in 60 ways with the loving compassion of Father for his only Son, all creatures caught in the prison of samsara, confused in the darkness of their ignorance. Compassionate One, with the brilliance of your wisdom, illuminate the darkness enclosing my mind, enlighten my intelligence and wisdom, so that I may gain insight into Buddha's words and the text that explain. 31. Like the sweet perfume of white lotus born in the ocean of knowledge, nourishing honeybees, the fortunate beings, your fame pervades all directions. You are proficient and powerful in upholding the precious doctrine. To you, O Lord Sang Tenzin Wangda, respectfully I pray.
Kính lễ Đức Văn Thù Sư Lợi, bậc đại trí ngài điều phục hai chướng ngại, tựa nhật quang lan tỏa khắp mười phương, bậc thực chứng chân nghĩa màu rốt ráo, từ tim ngài Bát Nhã Kinh thủ hộ nhiệm màu, cõi luân hồi chúng sanh thọ nghiệp báo, bị ngăn che bởi phiền não vô minh, sở hữu 60 pháp âm thù thắng, cùng đại bi ngài hóa độ chúng sanh, tựa từ mẫu chăm lo cho quý tử. Tiếng rồng vang ngài thức tỉnh hữu tình, thoát khỏi vòng luân hồi nghiệp báo, gươm trí tuệ ngài chặt đứt vô minh, tận diệt muôn vàn khổ đau cùng ách nạn. Trường tử Như Lai tối thắng toàn giác, ngài an trụ nơi thập địa pháp vân, báu thân ngài trang nghiêm thanh tịnh, 112 tứ hảo Như Lai, đây đầu đảnh lễ Đức Văn Thù Sư Lợi, cúi xin ngài tận diệt ám chướng vô minh. Om Arapasanadi. Con khẩn cầu dưới gót sen bậc đại trí, bàn pháp lực diệt phiền não vô minh, được trí sáng con thâm nhập nghĩa màu, pháp vi diệu cùng muôn vàn luận giải, như diệu hương ngọt ngào từ sen trắng, đàn xanh nơi trí thù thắng đại dương, hàng thiện căn như ong mật thọ nương, hồng danh ngài khắp mười phương quảng bá, đấng thiện xảo uy dũng bảo tồn pháp bảo vô giá. Nam mô Lốp Sang Tenzin Quang Đắc. Xin cung kính trì niệm.
Chere ze wang ten zin ya zo ye sha be se de ma ten yun ji ye dan gu ro ra na ma de la wa ne yan da